We're going to pass now to Hazel, who's going to share a little bit about the STEM Nation Award programme and some of the examples that we're seeing coming through of leading STEM within settings across Scotland. So over to you, Hazel, thanks.
Thanks, Mary. I think just picking up on what you were saying there from some of the evidence we've seen from our STEM Nation Award programme, leadership can look different in different settings at different points in time. What we've seen quite a lot is maybe a really interested and enthusiastic practitioner is really passionate about STEM, and that leads to them maybe taking things forward with smaller groups of children, and that can build to a sort of whole school initiative. So we completely understand, depending on where you're coming in at, that it might look different. But for anybody that's not familiar with the STEM Nation Award, just to kind of give you a wee bit of context, it's an award programme for schools and other education settings, including ELC and community learning and development groups. And the underlying framework to the programme is our STEM self-evaluation and improvement framework, which is aligned with HYGEOS and How Good is Our Early Learning and Childcare. So what I'm going to share with you today is some examples of evidence that have been submitted for one of the 5 elements of the award programme. So this one focuses on leadership in STEM, but it just gives you some examples of what leadership looks like in these settings from the perspectives of different people involved, whether that's school leaders, practitioners, or the learners themselves. So the first slide that we're looking at just now is some photographs from the evidence that was submitted to us from Peel Primary School, and just kind of talking through some of the leadership initiatives that they have running in terms of STEM. They've got a real focus on pupil leadership. So they have a pupil STEM committee with pupils from primary 1 to primary 7 who meet 3 times each term. And this group helps to develop what a good STEM lesson looked like. So sort of criteria for what the children themselves would describe a good STEM lesson was. And they also, those primary 1 to primary 7 pupils, took leadership on organising a family learning event for parents and families across the whole school. So really nice opportunities for the pupils to take forward some leadership activity there. The staff within the primary school, they had teachers engaging collaboratively in STEM professional learning. So they were working on developing the confidence of all staff delivering practical STEM and science activities. So like I mentioned at the start, you might have 1 or 2 members of staff in your setting who could potentially come from a science or STEM background. They might be confident with that, but if you've got colleagues that maybe haven't come from that background, their professional learning needs might look quite different. So I think what is really key in some of the evidence that we're seeing is that collaborative and collegiate professional learning, which is having a really good impact on developing that STEM approach across the whole setting. And also school leaders. At Peel Primary School, STEM featured on the school improvement plan, so there was a clear commitment to that across the whole setting. And staff across the school are supported in using progression pathways that were agreed with support from the local authority as well to support skills development and record progression in science. So some of those structural approaches and those commitments from the leadership team then help to sort of achieve and support consistency and actually provide a wee bit more information in terms of tracking and monitoring for learners as well. And Mary, if we can move on to the next slide, I can go through the next one. We've got another example here from Rathall Primary School in Edinburgh Council. So they also spoke as an example about collegiate leadership. So within the primary school there, they had a number of different leadership roles for staff. The senior leaders in the school were involved. There was a science specialist lead teacher that was identified and had some time protected to work on that area of expertise. There was a numeracy coordinator, and as a group there were also a number of other interested class teachers who would lead some of the STEM developments in the school. They worked on developing a whole school STEM policy including a specific set of vision, values and aims for STEM at Ratho Primary School. So kind of picking up on what Mary had mentioned earlier, that question about what is your why, they were able to think about their local context, what it meant for them, what support they needed, what their children and families needed, and that kind of underpinned all of the work that they did on STEM moving forwards. They also advocated a collegiate approach to STEM professional learning. So staff in the school engaged in science inquiry projects, practical science, professional learning, and also developing approaches to use ICT to support learners. They built in time into their working time agreement to ensure that there were opportunities for that learning to be cascaded to other staff across the school to really help improve the pedagogical approaches to STEM and really bringing in interest in learning and teaching approaches. But rather than that just sitting with one person, protecting that time for cascading that information helps to build that approach across the school. They also had some lovely examples of pupil leadership and choice. Graham will be able to go into this in a wee bit more detail, but they were involved in the Young STEM Leaders pilot, so a brilliant opportunity for the children there to take on STEM leadership roles. One of the things that they did as part of that as well is they had digital leaders in primary 7, so we're seeing a lot of that coming through as examples in our leadership submission from schools. They also had a nice one called digital deputes within each class. So there was an identified digital depute who was almost like a kind of class spokesperson for digital learning issues and providing support and trying to help inform decisions made at whole school level. And they also had eco warriors across schools. So if we can share the links to this, maybe Ian, if you wouldn't mind maybe popping it into the chat, but we have our STEM Nation Award information available online, and just picking up on the Eco Warriors point, we've actually increased the references to learning for sustainability as well, to really think across the breadth of STEM. It doesn't just need to be a practical science experiment, but we're encouraging people to think about the impacts of pollution and the climate emergency and the race to net zero. So there's lots of other broad opportunities that can be brought into this. Again, there was lots of opportunity for collaboration between staff and learning between classes at Ratho Primary School. So some of the older pupils had the opportunity to lead STEM activities for younger pupils. And pupils would regularly contribute to the STEM planning wall and surveys that were issued to the pupils about their experiences in STEM and things that they're interested in learning. And there were some really nice things that came from that. The staff were responsive to the requests of those learners. So there's a wee example that you can see in the top right. And a pupil had asked about rainbow roses, where you get the roses that are sort of multicoloured roses, and I think somebody had asked, where do they grow or where do they come from? And then they just sort of looked into the colour and the science behind that. But the teacher was then responsive to that, and that became part of the learning experiences for that class. So a really nice way where it's maybe not necessarily pupils leading an activity, but building in that personalisation and choice within the learning and really listening to the voices of the learners to then inform the lesson planning. We've got one more, Mary, and we'll move on to the next slide. So the last one here is from the ELC sector. So we've got Glendie ELC Centre in Renfrewshire Council, and they shared with us some examples of their engagement with the STEM self-evaluation and improvement framework. So they did that first, and they identified that they wanted to make changes in their playroom. So you'll see just a wee sort of screenshot of one of the graphs on the top page there, where they looked at what they wanted to have in their playroom, the approaches, sort of monitoring how learners were engaging, and they tracked that over time to see the impact that some of these STEM activities would have. So as a staff team, they developed a STEM core group, and this group developed a programme of learning developments and partnerships for the year. And then that bar chart that we've got showed, the follow-up survey showed improvement in 6 out of 7 aspects within 3 months. So they really saw STEM having a positive impact on the engagement of their learners. They also brought in STEM floor books as an approach. They brought them in as a way to support a child-led approach to STEM within the setting. So the play environment and resources were prepared to encourage curiosity and exploration. And rather than staff just writing in the floor books and including photographs, they encouraged the children to contribute to the floor books as well. So they had the opportunity to sort of make a wee note or contribute to a record of their own learning, but the children were also then able to sort of explore and evaluate maybe activities that other children had taken part in by looking at what was in the floor books and maybe use that as a source of inspiration for things that they themselves would maybe want to learn about. And then the last example that we've got from this setting was a wee note about STEM partnerships. The team identified that they had people round about them that knew a lot about STEM and had lots of experience in this area. So rather than sort of feeling that pressure to kind of go out and do it on their own, they're going, right, okay, in order to lead this and make these improvements, we want to make those partnerships and connections. So they collected learner and parent voice statements to monitor the impact that STEM was having. And they also developed a strong working partnership with a nearby primary school to share knowledge, and a neighbouring secondary school where they developed a shared STEM vision for their cluster. So it was really nice to see that input from different sectors. When you are talking about the same community, you're talking about the same families. So for us, it was nice to see that sort of vision spanning more than one sector. That was a really, really quick run through those sort of 3 examples of evidence. But we're more than happy if anybody's got any questions or would like to know more about these settings. We can talk to you a wee bit more about that, or if you've got any other questions about STEM Nation Awards, Mary, we've maybe got a couple of minutes if there are any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that could be really good. Hazel, thank you very much for sharing those. Folks, if there's any sort of questions or comments or ideas from what Hazel shared from these 3 settings that kind of speak to you, feel free to just come on mic and say that, or to pop that into the chat, because it's a really great opportunity to be able to have a bit of chat round about that if you've got kind of